Cool. So you want me to tee it up?
Yeah,
Reintroduce
sure.
the statement?
Yeah.
So I was just saying that so far, I think you're maybe like the 25th conversation I've had. It's really education and religion. And those are just two things I'm really interested in. But it has been fascinating to see how they intersect. And they don't necessarily need to, but I found that people who are really, really interested in education tend to have a deeper humanitarianism to them that almost becomes spiritual. And you're so mission driven. I just imagine that some of that has to resonate with you.
Yeah.
You could have chosen a number of other things to do.
You know what? Yes, I do agree with that. And I think it's it's really interesting because I think, and I believe, Malcolm said something, and I'll try to find a quote before we end, but he basically said that the true criterion for leadership has a spiritual element to it. And so that's always resonated with me when I I've wrestled with that in my head, so often. And then when I even think about my career, just like, and some people say like, oh yeah, it's just coincidence, but I'm like, I think that a lot of times there's deeper meanings in this. It takes some reflection and deeper thought to maybe make the connections and connect the dots between things. But like a small example, but huge as far as like, what changed my trajectory. Like, I wasn't even thinking about teaching initially. I knew I wanted to, I was raised by activist parents. I knew that I wanted to do something around social and racial justice. I didn't have educational justice per se in that calculus. So meeting Dr. Ryder, who talked about the connection between activism and teaching young Black youth superbly, teaching them really well, the connection between education and racial justice. And, and later to find out that the person and I was on my way to law school until I got shot, right? And, shot, left for dead, all over a football game. And it's just like, I want to work with youth like the young man, Derek, who shot me. So started off at the Youth Study Center. This is now it's called Juvenile Justice Center. But this was basically it's a kiddie jail. It's for kids waiting to be adjudicated by the courts. This is where they be held. So they may be there for a couple days, few weeks, couple years, so it all depends on how their case is progressing. And I didn't make it through orientation because it was like really hitting my soul in a deep way to be trained on how to prevent suicide watch for 12-year-olds and locking the door, making sure it's locked, where kids have to be, restraining and all that. I was like, oh, this is rough. Like, and they need great people, right? But it was not, it didn't sit well with me as far as like just my makeup and stuff. And right at that time, again, a coincidence, right? I'm leaving orientation. And then someone reached out to me and said, hey, they're recruiting Black men to teach. And Mama, a friend of mine called a former classmate. And, she was calling and she was like, Mama Cynthia wants you to call her. And I was like, sure. Like, Mama Cynthia is one of our mamas, she was a parent and a leader at the elementary school I went. This is how long ago it was. Like, so she's calling me about this. And I had seen her since then, but this is the connection was in elementary school. I reach out to her and she says, Sharif, I want you to, consider becoming a teacher. I think you'd be great. They have a meeting. And I was like, Mama Cynthia, I don't want to be a teacher. And in my head, I didn't say this out loud. In my head, I'm like, what in the world made Mama Cynthia think that I wanted to be a teacher? Like, like she's seen me like since elementary school, but what did I do to, she picked up the wrong signs. I had never wanted to be a teacher. But she did say, like, go to the meeting. And she was one of the mamas, so I respected her enough to go to the meeting, right? Again, so orientation didn't make it through. Someone calling me right at that time of where I'm trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Because I thought about law school, but I was like, okay, what I want to do right now. I go to the meeting. I meet Dr. Martin Ryder. He's the one that helped make the connection between this activism and teaching well. And then I end up at a school, Turner Middle School. Well, Turner Middle School, later to find out, is the school. This is where I started teaching, and I ended up there for a decade.
Mm.
But this is the school where the young man who shot me, he had dropped out of. So here I am
Wow.
starting my career at the same place that the person who shot me, mere blocks away. I got shot on Bartram High School's field. Turner Middle School was the middle school that used to feed into Bartram High School. So that's the proximity, like same general neighborhood, where this was part of the feeder pattern. So yeah, there's a lot to like really think about and dissect, and the connection. You're like, I am where I'm supposed to be. Like, at least that's, because I was still thinking about law school until I learned that. I say, you know what? I think I'm gonna stick with this because I'm enjoying it. I love it. And it feels like it's connected to something deeper.
Wow. Yeah. What a crazy story. So you were spoken about when I worked at Shoemaker with a profound reverence. But I never heard the story of you getting shot.
Yeah.
How old were you when that happened?
Man, it was 6 months after I graduated. So I had just turned 21. It was a few weeks after my 21st birthday.
Okay. And what were you studying? You said teaching wasn't on your.
Oh yeah, I was pre-law. I was on my way
Okay.
to law school, criminal justice, almost minored in psychology just to have understanding. They were like, oh, that's an extra semester. I was like, never mind,
Sure.
because I didn't even realize I had enough credits to almost minor in it. It was just something that I found. I was curious. And so when those, you take these electives, I have friends who were taking how to play golf because they're like, I'm going to be in business and I need to know how to play golf. But I was like, that looks boring. I'm going to go take the psych class, So that seemed interesting. But yeah, it was pretty, I enjoyed college. I went to a small school, Western PA, Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Still like friends and best friends with my roommates and the other folks that we attended school with. But I thought like law was going to be the way for me to to fight for racial justice, social justice. Thought it would be through the courts. But yeah, good old Mama Cynthia and Dr. Martin, just opened my eyes to a new way of looking at things, new way of looking at activism. When I thought about it, and I thought about the teachers that I had in elementary school, it made sense. Like, oh yeah, they were actually activists. They started a school because of their activism. They taught us through activism. So yeah, I mean, if I like, I would talk about it. I don't know if I probably speak about it now more than I did, as a principal. But yeah.
Do you mind if I ask some questions about it? I'm happy to.
No, sure.
What were the circumstances? You said it happened over a football game. I'm really curious about this moment in relation to your trajectory and sort of looking back and seeing these dots. I don't know how badly you were injured, but was there a moment that started to facilitate any discernment? I mean, were you forced to reconsider things at that point? I'm not really even sure how it happened, but.
Yeah. So we were playing football, Bartram High School's field, and how football is. It kind of elevates people's testosterone and aggression and stuff. So we were jawing back and forth, me and the same guy. And at one point, I tackled him, and he thought it was too hard, and so he got up swinging. I defended myself, and he lost the fight. But what I didn't realize was that during the time we were drawing back, so something, may have gone down anyway, even without the fight, because what we learned later was that he had told someone to go get some of his friends. And so they were in the stands at some point during the game. I never noticed them coming, we were just playing football, but at some point they were, they had guns and they were waiting by the stand. So of course the fight gave what they felt was an excuse to come over. And I didn't see them, but other folks on the field started running because at Bartram, there used to be this really small fence that separated the stands from the track. So you could just like really hop over it. And later people said like, oh yeah, everybody saw it and they ran, but I didn't see it. I was kind of walking away from the fight and I was like, come on, let's finish the game. And yeah, next thing I know, something hit me really hard in the back of the head. And when I stood up and realized there was a gun in my face. So ended up shooting me 3 times. So we ended up like wrestling for the gun. And he ended up shooting me 3 times. And yeah, it was pretty bad. Almost had to have my leg amputated. I was in the hospital, at least a dozen surgeries. I was in the hospital for over a month. And each time they were trying to save my leg, and it severed an artery. And so you know how bad, how quickly that can go bad, and so yeah, I mean, then some of the same issues, people said that it was hard for me to gauge time at that moment, but lost a ton of blood on the field. But they talked about that the ambulance took much longer than you would expect for a gunshot victim, and but ended up making it. And then there were some questionable decisions by the doctors that I first encountered, and I think they were like kind of the understudies were the ones that I that received me initially. And so all of the, these are all things that are steps, when you're, in impoverished neighborhoods, you're, maybe looked at like, it's a gunshot victim. It's, probably just like any other gunshot victim. They do this all the time, blah, blah, blah. Whatever biases that people have, there were decisions that were made that, impacted, the care that I received, particularly initially, which, probably caused further damage, and I was in much more severe of a situation than I would have been had care been looked at, or maybe had I been looked at a little bit differently. And mind you, and later to find out that this young man had dropped out. So here we were at the same age. I was 20, 21. He was 19 or 20. But he was a 7th grade dropout. That was 7th grade was the last grade he finished. So I guess technically an 8th grade dropout. And I was a college graduate, and so that's what helped, and even in the hospital bed, I'm just like, wow, how do I help young men who have level of anger, access to guns, and maybe willing to kill somebody over a fight? And so that's what landed me at the Youth Study Center. And I still had my eyes on law school, but I felt like, I can't go right away. I need some money to do that. I had a scholarship to go to IUP, but I had no more, the scholarship runs out after, so I didn't have any money. So I was like, all right, I'll work. And then the shooting happened. And then, before that I was just doing odd jobs. It was literally, I graduated in May, and I figured I'd work like a year. And so I was just doing odd jobs, courier. Yeah, I was a courier. What else I was doing a little social work, just random clients. And yeah, and I played football on Sundays. Bareback tackle football with my homies.
So you're 21 years old. How long was the recovery?
Man, I would say, so I was in the hospital for a month. I came out, so this happened October 4th or 5th. I came out a little bit before Thanksgiving. And I would say I was in a wheelchair initially. They had to do, as I said, 12 surgeries, skin grafts. They had to take muscle out of one leg, put it in the other. They had to take tendons and detach them from one place, attach them to another. They were trying to give me as much of normalcy as possible. But I would say, I could have used a cane the first year, but I refused to. So I would just limp. But that was probably the first year. That was my own, just I didn't even like when I was in a wheelchair, I didn't go out. I was like, no, I'm gonna stay right in. I did not leave the apartment that I was in. I was, really fortunate. I lived in a duplex, and my aunt, my mother's sister, lived upstairs, so I was downstairs. So the care was there. One of my best friends from high school stayed with me. So it was, I'm fortunate that I had a community to help me, heal, and not just physically, but I'd imagine I had some, emotional wounds. But at 21, I wasn't really thinking about the emotional wounds. I wasn't thinking about things like that. I was just, I just went through life normal. But I would imagine that because there was community, that helped me in ways that I didn't quite understand
Mm.
in the moment. But reflecting back, I think like, wow, you know what? I was so I'm grateful, and I was so blessed to be able to have a community that was right there to help and support me as I went through this convalescence.
Mm. So as you're starting to teach, you mentioned Mama Cynthia, and who was the doctor? I
Dr.
forget
Martin Ryder.
Dr.
Yeah.
Martin Ryder. How conscious was your motivation for teaching and trying to address so many of the problems that you experienced on the field that day, sort of culminating right in that moment? How conscious was that motivation, or is that something that you looked back on and then you were able to articulate?
No, what, like early on, I think what I was originally chasing was my own elementary school experience.
Hmm.
So I went to a elementary school that it was a pre-K to sixth grade school that was, I mean, the teachers were just amazing. They were so student centered. They were activists who started a school and said, you know what, we want Black youth to have a different educational experience. Matter of fact, I think that's what's on the front of the parent handbook I found a
Hmm.
couple years ago, an alternate educational experience, which is what they provided, so it was very um, not only anti-racist, but it was pro-Black.
Hmm.
And this is the school that I was raised in. So that's what I was really leaning on initially. It was less about like, hey, you know what? I don't want you to drop out, or I want you to like. It was. I thought about that when I went to the youth study center, but when I got to Turner Middle School, that wasn't really my thing because this was a school. This is And when I left, I wanted to go to like where are the kids before they get to a place like this.
Hmm.
So when I was struggling during orientation about like how I would have to conduct the job, I was thinking at the same time, like, man, where are they beforehand? In school, it just didn't click. I was just like, I was thinking more socially. And then, I get this call from Mama Cynthia. But so I think originally I was just thinking like, I had an amazing, and I was teaching eighth grade, but I was like, I had an amazing elementary school. It stopped at sixth grade, but it was a lot of that was my orientation, just the type of experience that I had, where I never felt unloved, where I always felt challenged and supported, where I felt like I was becoming smarter and smarter every day, month, and year that I attended there. And so that's, and I started off with literature and social study. Although I showed up at the school like, do you have anything for math and science? They're like, no, our vacancy is literature and social study. I was like, all right, cool, I'll take it, So it's like it was one of those. I was, just excited and nervous too, but I was excited just to teach. And I met my class, and I never looked back really,
Hmm.
even though I thought like coming in like, oh, I'll do law school, but I wasn't I never had this thing like I gotta leave education, or
Sure.
I gotta go do, even when I was thinking law school, I was like, all right, I could do that at night. You know what I mean? It was I just didn't see myself leaving the classroom. So even when they asked me to become an assistant principal 9 years after teaching, I still was like, I still taught a class or two, um, you know, each day because I was like, oh, I don't want to stop teaching. So
Huh.
I loved it. Yeah.
Were there moments where it was really challenging? Obviously, at some point as a leader, you had to think about, I mean, one of the challenges is not only getting new teachers into the door, but sort of retaining them, right? Was
Mhm.
there ever a moment where maybe you didn't necessarily look back, but it was challenging and you sort of outlined all these reasons why you would be motivated. I'm really interested in how you thought about replicating some of that intrinsic motivation that you had as a school leader, thinking, well, some people are just going to walk in education and think, oh yeah, I'll try this. How do you sort of keep those people?
Yeah. You know what? I think though, yes, there were a ton of challenges. Yeah, but I really think that's excuse me, any place you go, anywhere you work, particularly if it's facing human beings and serving human beings, that human element is going to add challenge. But hey, look, you work in the ocean in the middle of nowhere with nobody, you're going to face other challenges, right? So I think challenge is just part of life, but yeah, there were definitely times when I knew, I think that was one of the biggest challenges, like my orientation about education, particularly in that community, right? Like, we were at Shoemaker, and Shoemaker's in West Philly. I think one of the challenges that I thought about a lot was like, I had a deep connection to that school and that neighborhood, right? Shoemaker used to feed into the high school I graduated from, Overbrook.
Overbrook,
So
right.
Shoemaker used to be the junior high, and it fed into Overbrook. So this is my neighborhood, this is my community, right? And so that's a much deeper connection than most people who were working at the school. So even if they fell in love with it, I grew up in it and loved it, right? Which is, not to say one is more important and deeper, but it is a deeper connection and a longer connection. And then I would say the other pieces, and a lot, and you probably know this, but I went to summer school at Shoemaker one year.
I didn't know that.
You didn't know that? Yeah. So
No.
every once in a while I would share that with some students, So Mr. Kiesel, Brent Kiesel, was a chemistry teacher at Overbrook my junior year. And I was goofing off that year, particularly in his class. He was a first-year teacher. I was like, first-year teacher, and thinking about it at the time, I didn't think, oh, you're a first-year teacher, so I'm going to goof off. But in retrospect, I'm like, he didn't really have the best, classroom management, or expectations weren't super high. But he sure held me accountable at the end. It was just like, yep, you guys summer school. And I remember saying, like, summer school, like, I can't go to summer school. Like, you know what I mean? I'm just like, I'm smart. Like, I don't need summer school. That's for my friend that's a real goofball. And it's like, nah, you earned it. And I remember, like, man, this guy. So I ended up going to summer school. But the first thing I thought about was like, man, I'm gonna have to fight every day in this joint. Like, that was my original thought, because that was the reputation that Shoemaker had. And which is sad, because years later, Shoemaker, we end up working there, but we end up working there as part of a turnaround school, because that reputation had persisted. So you figure I was there in 1987 till 2007, when it was, became a charter, 2006, 7, when it became a turnaround charter school. So that's a long time for, that type of reputation, to persist, unfortunately. But yeah, and I still lived there. I would walk home, on plenty of days, I would walk home from Shoemaker after work. Because I still lived in the neighborhood, I lived around the corner from where my mom raised us, where my parents raised us. So yeah. I don't even remember what your original question was, but
well, I was interested in it. I was interested as a school leader, right? You're thinking about retention and retaining these new teachers, or even just regular. Great mug, by the way. Shoe Crew.
Shoe Crew, yes sir.
I'm interested if you had a unique challenge as someone who had all this motivation to sort of pour themselves into that school, thinking, how do I get, how do I fight? How do I fight for retention and sort of fight attrition when people don't have as many roots, sort of attaching them to the school?
Yeah, I think if there was anything deliberate, it's about building community. Like, how do you build a community within, and how do you build communities within that community, right? And so I was always really big on leadership teams, great team leads, content team leads, leadership teams, and then what is their mindset, what's their orientation, and how do they believe in serving, right? So if I look at myself as the principal, And I look at my job as partly removing barriers from teachers and students so that they can perform at their highest level. If I have a servant leader orientation and just belief in that as a very distinct, specific, and vital leadership skill, then my part of my job is going to try to get as many other servant leaders in leadership roles, both formal and informal, and making sure that we have that. And I think, how we try to approach, keeping, retention levels high is building community. So even, this teacher didn't grow up here, but they're here, they feel supported, they feel a level of collegiality, they feel aligned to the mission of servant leadership to the students and the families and communities we're a part of. That can be like its own energy force, I believe, if it's, nurtured and replicated, where it's not just a singular, oh, that's the principal and that's what they think, but everyone else is doing something else. But if that's a whole, just tons of adults who are thinking that way. And I would say the other level of it is like bringing a level of activism, which was also orientation that I just believed in. Like, who are the if educators, teachers, and staff are look at themselves as activists at some level, and it's a continuum, right? And some people are like, hey, this is a little uncomfortable for me. But I'm willing to try it. I'm willing, to be engaged with it, to think about, what does anti-racist mean? What does it mean to have a professional learning community? I think those are some of the ingredients that we try to, just incorporate. And again, not by myself, but if you have leaders amongst leaders, then they're also fostering and generating some of the same layers. And so I think our students fed off. Hey, like, here's something. I think right now, yesterday, we had our 6th or 7th alum come back to work within the school.
Wow.
Yeah. So David Olamide is the latest who's going to be a teacher in his alma mater. And when I think about that, and there's several others who are just out in other spaces teaching and in education, but the fact that we have 6 alum, our first graduating class was 2011. So it's not like we've been around forever.
Sure.
So that's a decade. And, we see, and there were others who, they were always coming back. They were always supporting. They were always, helping to mentor, like they were starting mentoring programs just because we're like, yeah, I went here and I want to support the students who came behind me. Like it was such a, that type of environment, which also helps reduce attrition for adults, right? Because they see, sometimes you see as a teacher, as a principal, you don't see the impact, right? Because you're like, all right, they've gone and I think I made impact. I don't know. But because we're a community school, we were always getting updates on what the impact was and what we could do better as well.
How long were you? Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, so I think that helped with building a community that can support, much higher than average retention rate.
What did you say was the first graduating year?
2011.
And how long were you there as a principal?
Altogether 11 years. Yeah.
Okay. And you came in as the principal, right?
Yeah, I came in as a principal, and the school had been a turnaround 2 years before I got there. So we were it was originally a middle school, and they kept adding a grade. Basically, like, we're not letting y'all go. Y'all got to stay here to help us turn this into a high school, because it was a middle school, which was part of the appeal for me going. Not only it being in the neighborhood, I could walk home. I went there as in summer school one year, but also like, wow, this is going to be a middle and high school, because my first 15 years was all in middle school, but I was very interested in working in a high school too. So this was an opportunity to be in middle and high school, and help to grow that process. So it was fun. That's fun.
So I'm aware of the time, and there's a million questions I could ask you about Shoemaker and all the different initiatives, and even just the Mastery Charter Network and all of your experiences watching that grow and being a part of that growth. We're gonna have to save that probably for another time.
Cool.
I'm fascinated because obviously you cared so much about that role in that school. So obviously the thing that you left for has to be enormous. And it's interesting hearing about your career, sort of thinking about this problem and then going to the root of it, or identifying the root as education, and now sort of, in some sense, going further to this route. And I'd be really interested to hear you talk about your experience at the Center for Black Educator Development. I love the banner in the background.
Oh yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, and that's exactly the only reason why I left. I was not prepared to leave. I wasn't thinking about leaving. We had, and I had been doing, work to support a Black teacher pipeline and rebuilding a Black teacher pipeline in Philly and around the country, pretty much nights and weekends. And, my final couple of years, really since, I want to say 2012. So most of my time there, I had a arrangement with the, with the central office, where I could, really be a principal for 4 days, and that 5th day, I could really work on this initiative. So I started off as a principal ambassador fellow at the U.S. Department of Ed, which required a lot of travel, a lot of outside of school time work. And so they were, I'm always grateful that they were flexible enough and supportive enough to give me that time and space, to really do the work that I was just really passionate about. And again, it's like giving back, right? I came in through this Black teacher pipeline, through alternative certification program, through mentorship, through support. And then here I was, decades in, and wanting to provide that, but also recognizing that there was starting to be a lack of Black teachers, and even in a place as diverse as Philadelphia. And originally I thought it was only a local issue, but then doing that fellowship at the Department of Ed, I realized that it was national as well. And it just, is worthy of our best efforts, our best strategies. And, so at some point I had to make a decision, because the work was starting to grow. And I had to make a decision: do I stay and continue to try to do this nights and weekends, or do I commit fully to this work after being a teacher and a principal for a quarter of a century, 26 years? And so ultimately, and I still thought I might be able to do both. I had a funder who was interested in funding our work, where we, at a scale, $1 million, to be able to build a team and really press forward and try to go much deeper than what I was able to do with limited time. Originally, I was trying to figure out all the ways to stay a shoemaker. I was like, well, can I defer? And one of my mentors was like, it's not a college application. If you defer this, you probably won't see it again. I thought about, kind of subcontract, like, oh, I'll stay here and I'll hire somebody. Even Mastery was trying to work with me to figure out, like, oh, how can we support you to, remain and doing what you love, being a principal, and still doing this work, and you were there. You saw like how often I had to, be somewhere else, and I was, grateful that Katie Ziemba would, graciously, who was assistant principal, graciously every time would sign up to be, or agree to, be elevated to acting principal. And any time that I left, to maintain consistency and clear lines of communication and so forth. But ultimately I decided to, what, I can come back to being a principal, but I may not have the chance to build a team to really think deeply about what would it take to rebuild a national Black teacher pipeline, one that's sustainable, highly effective, and predictable. And so we actually piloted it in 2018, and still wasn't thinking about leaving. It was just like piloting them, like, hey, this worked, and handing it off to, to another organization, the fellowship, and ultimately ended up leaving and deciding to, let's launch the center and let's see what we can do over the next decade. And so this spring will be 4 years, which is just nuts to me. We left in the spring of, we ended that year 2019. And now we're coming up into 2023, and we'll be in our 4th city this summer. So we're in Philly, Camden, and Detroit, Michigan. And we are hoping to expand in Memphis this summer.
Wow. I want to give you your 15 minutes, so I'm just keeping an eye on the time.
Okay,
But
okay, no worries.
if I can ask you the
Sure,
last
sure.
question, I'm interested. I would imagine in a role like this, you'd have to be learning so much,
Mhm.
especially in those first couple of years. I'm interested. Obviously, this question alone will be inadequate in encapsulating all the cool things you're doing. But is there anything that you've learned really recently that's fascinating to you, that's exciting about the potential of what you're doing?
Yeah, and it all centers around the youth. There's actually, a couple things I would highlight. One, so we started in 2019, so people, your listeners will recognize like, woo, that's a few months before the pandemic,
Right.
So, like you started on your own, and like and everything takes risk, right? And someone said some book, I forget who's it's attributed to, but it's basically like you never know how far you can go until you risk going too far.
Hmm.
And so that like really resonates with me. Like, man, talking about going too far, like leaving, the your school that you've been in for 11 years, the career you've had for 26 years to launch something, and then here comes the pandemic.
Hmm.
But the youth, I think, and it's not that I learned it, but I relearned it. I think I relearned things over and over again. Because as human beings, we're hard-headed, stubborn, and forgetful. So we have to relearn the same things. But we have to listen to our youth, and we have to invite them to helping to solve problems they had no hands in creating.
Hmm.
And so in 2020, we were really contemplating severely limiting our work, scaling back significantly. And it was the youth that said, no, let's just do it virtually. And I was shocked initially and these are high school and youth. And we said, like, what do you mean? We did freedom schools. We do a paid teacher apprenticeship. And so that's what we piloted in 2018 at Shoemaker. We had high school students, college youth teaching younger students. At that time, it was incoming seventh graders. So we'd have Learning Institute and all of spring, the sixth graders who would be with us that fall. And throughout the summer, we'd have, basically, maybe 12, 15 weeks of Learning Institute, orientation, literacy and math skills, and some enrichment activities. And so that's what we piloted. That's what we turned it into, like as a teacher apprenticeship for high school and college youth to explore teaching, even if they're not ed majors and while they're still in high school. And so we were going to pause on that, because it's like, well, it's the pandemic. We can't be in person. And I didn't think we would be able to capture the spirit virtually. But they
Hmm.
insisted that we still do it virtually. And so it was the youth who made that, impactful influence on our direction. And it was because of their feedback that we had it. And it was amazing. Like, one, not only did we have these high school and college youth, but we had all these elementary school students, and it expanded our work. When we were in person, we were in 2 sites in Philly. We did it virtually, and we had 15 or 16 states represented.
Wow.
Students from all over the country, even a third grader second grader as far as California,
Wow.
who was getting we started at 8:30 in the morning. So
Hmm.
she's up 3 hours before that.
Wow.
And I remember speaking to her mother, like, you sure? Like, it's really early. She's like, listen, this kid has been up every day, all the time, because that's when her father goes to work. And so
Hmm.
she's just up. She's like, and I always have to find something to do with her with 5:30 in the morning. So she had perfect attendance,
Wow.
so just being able to have that type of influence by high school students,
Hmm.
and they also came up with our campaign. And so they have a campaign that they launched. They were responsible for educational justice project. They've been, working on a campaign, and they came up with hashtag We Need Black Teachers. And we just thought, like, that's
Yeah.
straightforward. Like, why are you like, that's pretty.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, we didn't want any distractions. We want people to understand what our rallying cry and demand is
Hmm.
without any distractions. And again, these are high school students, participating in a focus group. And so we said, you know what, we'll help amplify that. And so if your listeners look up hashtag We Need Black Teachers on any social media platform, they'll be able to see like, oh, this is what high school students started.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. Well, you have 12 minutes, so I lied, and I'm sorry.
Oh, no
But I
worries.
can't
All
thank you
good.
enough
All
for the
good.
time, and I wish you
No,
well in
my
your
pleasure.
meeting. I'd
Thanks
love
so
to have
much.
another conversation, so please keep in touch. I can't wait to see everything that you do. It's such a cool movement, and it's awesome to have this connection.
Yeah, no, thank you, and appreciate you, and it's like so cool to see you, um, you know, doing just a cool thing, and I've just always appreciated, like, one coming in and choosing, we always say choosing to be here, and
Mm.
you chose to be a shoemaker, and your commitment and your care, for our students, for the mission, for the community was evident. And so I appreciate that. And so it's great to see you in a different realm.
Yeah. Well, thank
And
you for that.
yeah.
Please, I would be in trouble if I didn't ask you to tell Shayna Terrell that I said hello.
Sure will. Sure will. Matter of fact, I'm gonna just take a quick snap and send it to her.
Okay.
Cool. Well,
Awesome.
thanks a lot, Gregorio.
Great talking to you, and I
Yeah,
hope to be in
same.
touch soon.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Good
Let's
luck.
do that. Thank you. Take care.